Welcome to AI Health Insight. It is me, Moses, trying to be here to see how I could get the children of Israel to um, to listen. The children of Israel are myself, all my cells inside of me in my body, not anybody else on the external part of the world. I am trying to get my cells to listen. We are in the wilderness, I guess, and we are there, and I need to get the words from the higher powers to instruct my children of Israel to do that which they have to do. But they are complaining that they miss their glucose, their source of glucose. They used to be having all the grains and all the plants and all the different vegetables and stuff, and of course the bread at evening times. And so, according to the words of the Lord, the higher power, the children of Israel are now instructed to have their meat, which is the source of fatty acids and the source of amino acids, in the evening, not in the night, in the evening, and have the source of glucose in the morning. Now, I am referencing a book, so this could be very neutral. I'm referencing a book called Exodus. I don't know if you heard about this book, but let's reference this book. So this book is Exodus, and if you want to follow the chapter, you would find the chapter 16. So this is not written in the book. This is just a summary from the New International Version, based upon the contextualization of the story. And in Exodus 16, that's yourself, me. I'm in the wilderness, the desert, whatever you want to call it. And grumbling start. Where does grumbling start? In your belly. Your belly start to grumble, so you start grumbling in your belly, and you want your glucose, right? But here comes the higher power and says to Moses, I am Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day to gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they would follow my instruction. The point being, not that bread is going to be supplied, but it is an instruction about my health that is being provided here, which is critical for my long-term longevity survival. Following an instruction about something. Let's continue. Now, on the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other day. So, if we want to use this as Gregorian calendar time, on a Friday we are supposed to put in twice as much nutrients in our body as on every other day. We'll see why. Maybe we will see why. So Moses, which is the one who gets the instruction, that's the body, from the higher power, would say to Aaron, which is the liver, right? So Moses and Aaron said to all that these are called the two weaknesses of the body. Moses and Aaron said to all Israel, so all organs, cells in the body, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your belly grumbling against him. So there are two particles here that has to participate: the timing, evening, and the timing morning would bring in eternal power when we have hunger, grumbling, or maybe it's not even hunger, because the hunger satiety hormone does not equate to ghrelin only. Satiety has nothing to do with grumbling. Ghrelin is the hormone that makes you grumble or feel hungry, and you don't necessarily have to be in a state of nutritional need to become hungry. It is a hormone that is stimulated because of the desires of for more glucose, fructose, or galactose, basically glucose, because galactose and fructose breaks down or converts back into glucose. They are not used. Fructose goes to the liver, just like alcohol, they go to the liver and they have to be converted into glucose. They are very much burdening the liver with extra work, whereas if you would say which one is the best, you still would come back and agree glucose is the body's fuel. Excess of it is a challenge, but fructose is a challenge for the liver because it has to convert. That's why fructose is never provided in nature in a raw liquid format. It's provided in a format that is bounded with fiber, and we say fiber plus fructose equal fruits. So the word fruits is fiber plus fructose, and that fructose is not for you, it is for where the fruit is supposed to go, in the colon, for the colon bacteria to use the fiber to convert it into butyric acid or butyrate for your colonic cells to get butyrate, which is their energy source. So fructose is not for the blood system. Fructose is for down there, colon. Fructose should go right down, and to allow fructose to go down, you want to have fructose on an empty stomach, meaning first thing in the morning. If you are eating fruits, eat your fruits on an empty stomach, specifically the high fermented types like watermelons, melons, papaya. Eat them on an empty stomach with your mindset that you are targeting the colon, because the colon bacteria could consume the fruits and be rewarded with a fructose molecule, and they would convert the fructose into the format that is more absorbable by the body without killing the liver cells. When I say kill the liver cells, basically what happens when you consume fruits and the fructose goes, or not fruits, when you consume fructose in the molecule, whether it's true fruit or whether it is true high fructose corn syrup, it's just that fruits, you hardly get fructose rushing to the liver, which is the good thing, except you blend in your fruits, squeezing them and drinking them. When fructose goes to the liver has to give away ATP, give way from the from the T, give one phosphate group to the process and becomes ADP, which is a lower state of energy, and you become a little bit more wary. The liver cells alone, you can't go to the other cells and say, give me some ATP. No, because fructose has to be contained in a box for its metabolism inside the bloodstream to the liver, inside the liver. If it stays inside the gut, then the gut cells, when they start working on it, they contribute the phosphate group to it in the colonic, down in the colon, where they do the colonic fermentation or the colonic processes, and they actually use the fiber to, so they love to eat the fructose. That's kind of like the energy source, and they convert the fructose in a better form. They actually add a phosphate group to it, so that if it gets absorbed in the colon, it's not going to rob anybody. And they also convert the fiber and give us a little bit of butyrate, okay, for the colon cells, energy system, and health. So having fruits on an empty stomach is critical. That's why fruit would fall into the category of sources of carbohydrates. So fruits are fibers and fructose. Let's get that clear. Fructose is not meant for you in the liver, not meant for the liver. It's not targeting the liver, it's targeting colonic cells in the colon. So the rule here is have fructose on an empty stomach, which we would see why, or have glucose on an empty stomach, which we would see not on an empty stomach in the morning. We will see why. Let's go through that second part now. So Moses and the grumbling. Who are we that we should grumble against us? So who are we that you should grumble against us? Okay, that's, I guess, yes, that's Aaron guy and Moses guy speaking to these people there. Moses said, "You will know that it was the Lord, the higher state of consciousness, when He gives you meat. When He gives you meat, that's literally flesh, to eat in the evening." So He gives you flesh to eat in the evening. Now be careful here, we are not speaking about late evening, because we would get into the science of this statement here. And all the bread you want in the morning. Now meat here is actually flesh. So let's go and put in a note here. So here we have this statement say He would give you flesh to eat in the evening. Now the evening, there is one reference again back in Exodus with the living in the night, the ate late in the night, the meat, of course, with the bitter herbs. We know that to stimulate the gallbladder to release the bile and the pancreatic juice to make some very strong pancreatic enzymes to help digest the fatty acids when it comes out from the chyme down into the duodenum there. So again, bile juices mixed with pancreatic juices. However, what we are looking at here is we should eat our meat in the evening. Now I'll get into the program of this if you subscribe to my channel, and I'll get into this with my protocol here. If you buy this protocol, I'll discuss this with you. You could of course buy this protocol and ask for a discussion. The protocol is $6, but the discussion is a little more. You would PM me or DM me for this. Now, and all the bread. Now you have to start thinking bread is the source of glucose. Bread is a source of glucose. Glucose is the energy system that comes from the bloodstream into the bloodstream, goes into the bloodstream. Now the liver should be making glucose by moving out or pulling out stored glucose. Right, so when we eat and we have excess amount of glucose in the blood, the liver would store that, and then when your blood sugar levels drop, the liver would go back and release that from its stored format, right? Glycogen stores, and it releases that back into glucose into the bloodstream. So there is a ebb and flow. So in the morning when you eat, according to Exodus, you would have an extra source of glucose. So what happens to the liver? The liver is basically at rest for energy production, because your source of glucose is coming in from your bloodstream. Molecules of glucose. No bread is entering your blood. Bread is digested by the various enzymes in the small intestine to become molecules of glucose, and the glucose enters the blood. Multiple molecules. The thing is, your role in life is basically to ensure that glucose enters the bloodstream in a trickling format. Let's just say 500 every 10 minutes, 500. That might be better than 5 million molecules of glucose just rushing into the blood. That is where the challenge comes about, and that is why we have to be careful of our overconsumption of certain formats of carbohydrates, which leads to a higher concentration of molecules of glucose in the blood, and then that gives the liver the challenge of stopping what it has to do to pull glucose out of the blood and get the glucose stored as glycogen. Okay, so that is why we want to be conscious. So when we have our grumblings, we the children of Israel, that is your internal whatever, when we have in our grumblings is largely because we want glucose, and that is largely where we have to be very careful, because we have to remember that we have a higher power which plays with the liver, and the liver could go back to the storehouse and return stored glucose, which was called glycogen. It could return that to keep you when you do not have glucose coming from your small intestine rushing into the blood. So here is where in the morning, I'm going to delete this now. In the morning, we are told that we we consume the bread. So in the evening, we start with the evening. We put in the amino acids first. The sources of amino acids and fatty acids comes in first. You start your life in the night or the evening. Sorry, evening and then morning was the first day. Always put your amino acids and your sources of amino acids and your sources of fatty acids comes first. This is first. This is first. Number one. Not the morning. The morning is after. Why? Because in the night, let's go through this here. In the night, your body, the same liver, is gonna take all these amino acids and fatty acids to do the repair and rebuilding job. Again, you would want to study my protocol to understand what's happening there. The liver is doing that, and without these raw materials, they call them the macronutrients, the amino acids and fatty acids, of course with the minerals too. Of course, with those nutrients, the liver is doing a job that could bring you up to a higher degree, a higher standard. It could elevate your physical body. Why? Because it has present amino acids and fatty acids. Fatty acids could stick around for a few days. Amino acids, on the other hand, a few hours, and then they may get converted themselves back into glucose. They don't stick around long, and that's why it is so important to focus on your source of amino acids, whether it is your meat, your eggs, your whatever, your protein powder, whatever. Focus on good sources of amino acids when you are consuming. It is critical for your development of the physicality. Again, my protocol is about the details of these things. I urge you to buy the protocol and support this channel. Now, you start in the night, so you start with your sources of amino acids and fatty acids. It's in your system. What is it doing in your system? The amino acids and fatty acids in the evening digest and create that steady flow of amino acids and fatty acids. So you eat meat, it doesn't digest in 5 hours and go. It digests from the stomach, the acidic stomach, in 4 to 5 hours. Good beef, good lamb, good whatever. And that trickles down into the duodenum, not like one big rush like how you and I eat our food in 2024. No, it takes its time, and one bolus of food comes out as chyme, goes into the duodenum, gets wet by the bile and the pancreatic juices, and that gets digested like a train or car. You know, the cars on the train, in a nice smooth fashion over a number of hours, going through what is about 20 feet of small intestine, pulling out all the amino acids, minerals, vitamins and fatty acids and absorbing it into the blood. That could take 8 hours or more in that whole process. And then once you have a good digestion flow, you would have little waste from the meat, the flesh, and the source, which is your source of amino acids and fatty acids, because you are absorbing them. That's why you are eating in the first case. Now, when you bring the bread in the morning, which is a source of glucose, which is carbohydrates, what we call carbohydrates in 2024, we don't see glucose staying long in the stomach, in the acidic stomach, because it does not want no acid. It does not. Carbohydrates cannot stay in acidic condition. What it's trying to do is get out of the acidic condition to get to the small intestine quickly for absorption by the enzymes, amylase and so forth, coming from the pancreas. Now, the problem with carbohydrate is that it does not trigger bile, which is okay, but it triggers the pancreas to release the digestive enzyme for carbohydrates to become glucose. So the sources of glucose triggers that from the pancreas, amylase and so forth. However, what we would find happening, because it doesn't want to stay in the stomach, it has to pass through the acidic stomach for the sterilization of the food, so that you don't bring in bad bacteria like H. pylori, Salmonella, E. coli. But because you had meat and flesh the evening before, your stomach is naturally on alert for higher acidic levels, pH 1 or 2 to 2.5. Now, you came out from rest or sleep in the night, your pH levels would be even better than that. If you are living in good conditions, your pH levels in your stomach would be in excellent conditions, because your stomach is at rest. When your stomach is at rest, think about it, the acidity would be very best. And that acidity, when you drop in your source of carbohydrates, which would contain a lot of the bacteria in them, they would not survive inside that acidic stomach. They pass through there quickly within 15 to 20 to 30 minutes, and then they get into the duodenum, where they start triggering the pancreatic juices to release the pancreatic juices, and that comes out and gives you what? It gives you the ability to digest the carbohydrates to get your source of glucose, or to get the glucose molecules. And that follows the same pattern as the protein, but it now, because carbohydrate is a fast mover, it is also moving fast, and it starts pushing now against the protein or the meats, which is your source of fatty acid and amino acid, and that could start pushing for you to have that movement. Of course, remember, you had enough release of bile during the night, because the liver was releasing the bile when you had your meat in your belly in the night. Those things, bile would also be released in the night, and bile is not just a waste product, but it is an important product to be reabsorbed, but it is also helping you with moving out some of the liver dump. What is not required from the blood, the liver dumps it into the bile, and that would come out. So your source of glucose coming in the morning becomes that little push behind, because glucose has this, or carbohydrates as we say, sources of carbohydrates, glucose has this push effect to try to get out of the system. You do not overeat the carbohydrates in the morning. Also, you become careful. So while here we see bread, you have to take out the word bread, because bread has a connotation or a construct of being a physical device. When you say bread, you think about this, right? You think about something like this. That is when you say bread. This is not what this text, in if you are following it from a scripture, means. It does not mean physical bread. It means source of glucose. So this word here could mean rice. Well, for the Caribbean people, we have something called provision, fig, breadfruit, bulgur, all the starchy vegetables. We have so many different things. We have cereals people are eating. They are all sources of glucose. So here it is clear for us that we have adopted this, so people understand that, and we have gone to the highly refined processed substances, and even to the point where we have people adding in high fructose corn syrup in cereals to literally put fructose to the liver. The liver does not want fructose. You see, bread is not a fructose. The word bread here is used to represent a digested product, which would be glucose, not fructose. Fructose would come from your fruits, and it would not even go high to the liver from the fruits, because of the fiber content bounding up the sugars that would bring it down to the colon for the colon bacteria. So let's get that very clear. So when you eat your fruits in the morning, you are not eating a source of fructose that would hit your liver in such a drastic way as drinking your fruit juice in the morning, drinking your fruit juice from the boxes in the morning, or drinking milk and high fructose corn syrup cereals. Our Pop Tarts, those kinds are high fructose according to the box that of Pop Tarts I have, and I have it there for example. So let's get that clear. And so bread is in the morning, the meat is in the evening, and when we say evening here, 2, 3, 4, so that you're giving enough time for the acidity to build up and start the real digestive statements in your acidic stomach, because you will be more calming down, still active, more calming down, but not lie down in your bed. In the night, you go to your bed, you have whatever, a little cup of herbal tea, whatever, you settle yourself. The digestive process in the stomach more than likely should have already been calmed down, and you start having the release of the digestion from the stomach into the duodenum and into the small intestine, which is a total different process when it comes to the digestion of what we call meats, which is the sources of amino acids and fatty acids. So what has Moses been telling us here? So I, being Moses, I'm trying to tell you what this means for you today as children of Israel in the desert, which is the organs and the cells of the body. So this Lord, the higher power, gave Moses this instruction, and he says to give the meat in the evening and the bread in the morning. Now, if you are a Bible believing person, you would say, well, you never saw that before. And I know you never saw that before, because it is written in the Bible, and you generally Bible believing people cannot see anything in the Bible, because they are told what they need to hear from those who choose to say. You would have heard that story before and say, well, God only gave them manna, but that is not what this is saying here. God gave them instructions to eat meat while they were grumbling in the desert in the evening, and to eat the bread in the morning. So who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against, well, the higher power. Then Moses told Aaron, say to the entire body. Say to the entire body. This word here means body. Say to the entire body. Come before the higher power. Go before the higher power. Come before the higher power. For the higher power has heard your grumblings. Right? While Aaron was speaking to the whole body, they looked towards the desert, and there was the glory of the higher power appearing in the cloud. The glory of the higher power comes from the brain. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling. So now listen to what the higher power would give, the instructions that your higher power would always give you. The higher power would always give you these instructions over and over and over. But you would have to look to the desert. You would have to go to quietness, a place where there is nothingness, a place that is called nothingness. You would put yourself in the state of nothingness. Wipe your minds of everything. Bring your entire body to a state of nothingness, and you would hear these instructions being repeated to you. The instructions would say simply, go and have your meat in the evening, or twilight, meaning the evening time. Have your meat, and in the morning when you wake, fill yourself with your source of glucose, which is your bread, whatever you have. Not physical bread. If you don't have the bread made with good flour, we have a whole set of contaminated bread around the place, we know that. But fill yourself with the source of glucose, like your provision, your whatever. When it says fill here, we are speaking about bring yourself to conscious awareness of knowing how much gas you need, which is your glucose sources for the day. If you know that your most important time for the day is the morning and you are active, then having glucose means you are pushing glucose into your blood, and so the glucose could be consumed by your muscles in your legs, your muscles in your arms very easily, because they do not need the pancreas to get involved, because they consume the glucose directly. That's your muscle cells. Whereas if you are sedated in the morning and you go and load up with glucose, which is from your source of glucose, you then would be forcing your liver to pull out the extra glucose from the blood and convert it into the stored format that we spoke about a little earlier on. Therefore, be conscious. That is why you have to appear as a whole body and go in a state of nothingness, meaning fit yourself as the desert. There is nothing in the desert. Become nothing and hear the truth and wisdom of your reality. Your reality is you are nothing. Become nothing. Eat your meat to get your source of amino acids and your source of fatty acids in the evening. We are not saying in the night, we are saying in the evening, so that you have digestion happening before you really go and lie down. And then you go in the morning and you may have your source of glucose to propel you, so that the glucose is coming from your small intestine, and now the liver gets a little break. Because you could, of course, expect that if you have a lot of fat, and that is for those who may have challenges with your health, you may completely, because you are not in a state of high activity, you may end up completely having to forsake the source of glucose for months to ensure that your liver brings out all that stored glucose in glycogen and visceral fat, subcutaneous fat, and other fats that it has stored all these extra glucose as different types of fat. The liver may need months to return all these back into energy source such as glucose. And so you may have to forsake the sources of glucose for a pretty long time. Could be up to years for some people. So that your body could then come back to recalibrate based upon the instructions given to your whole body in the desert of the timing of which you consume certain substances. Now let's look at this. We know that the glucose gets stored when it is not consumed. What is the greatest consumer of glucose? Your muscle cells. When does your muscle cells consume glucose? When it is activated, active. What muscle cells? Your legs are the greatest ones that consume glucose. Does it need insulin? No, they don't, because they are consumers of glucose directly from the blood capillaries and the blood serving pipes. Okay, so why do you need so much insulin? Well, you need insulin for certain organ cells, certain fat cells who needs insulin to push the extra glucose into them, or to push the glucose into them, because they are not a fan of consuming glucose. And therefore you need insulin, which comes from the pancreas. Therefore you need to force your pancreas beta cells to make a lot of insulin when you are heavy on your source of glucose and light on your source of leg work. You are not active, you are not moving, but you are putting in glucose even in the morning. You have to be certainly cautious about this activity. So what do you do then? Then you become conscious enough to say, I will supply my glucose according to my needs in my state. So if you are conscious now enough, you would start realizing when you are consuming glucose, you are consuming glucose with the ability to say, my source of glucose must be trickling through the small intestine in the morning, slow as possible, so that there is no need for the liver to do so much of pulling in and converting and storing of extra glucose. So then you are saying, oh, I understand why fruit may become necessarily important. I understand why the starchy vegetables are much more very important. I understand why all these so-called fibrous vegetables are so much better to supply glucose than high fructose corn syrup, which is one challenge in itself, with a high load of glucose, with a liquid format of sugary teas or glucose laden teas or other types of substances that are loaded with liquid type free molecules of glucose already. You may want to be cautious about this, especially if your life is one that is not much on the leg. So in conclusion, we now see that, notice this piece you never see before. Huh? You always hear bird. That the evening, the quail came. The quail came first. In the evening, cover the camp. And in the morning, they call it a layer of dew. That was the source of glucose. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost was on the ground. He appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is this? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is bread the Lord has given you to eat. Now it is the source of glucose. So we give a story, a title, manna, and we make up all stories about manna and how important manna was, but no mention of the source of fatty acids and amino acids was ever given in our discussion to help the people to understand that it is much more than glucose in the morning. It is so important to have in the evening our quail or our meat, our sources of amino acids and fatty acids. Wherever you get it from, it doesn't matter. But note, putting it in your mouth is not putting it in your blood. And that is where we need to understand how things go from the mouth to the blood. And here it is where Moses said to them, it is the bread of the Lord given to you to eat. And apparently that's the only part they saw, the source of glucose. No mention here about the quails that came in the evening. Nothing is well stated, nothing is said. It's just a statement made, and it was the evening part, and the morning part, everything goes towards this whole story about the manna. And more instructions were given to them. But let's look at what happens when we interrogate statements that could be proven versus statements that are just thrown about loosely without thought. Sources of glucose. They claim sources of amino acid would rotten. Is that so? Versus sources of glucose would rotten. Let's see which one. According to this, you were supposed to gather as much as you need. Some measure color UMA for each person, and notice they got a certain amount of glucose that they were supposed to control. They were supposed to intake the source of glucose based upon a measure for each person that is in the tent. I don't know if you saw that part, but the load of glucose given in the manna was not just to be eaten randomly and as much as possible. The amount per person was measured in a format called OMA. Everyone is to take as much as they need. Take an OMA for each person in the tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, so some little. So you could never tell how much glucose one person need compared to how much glucose another person need. That is based upon you, your activity levels, your liver storage, your liver conversion levels. All these things we don't know, so you can't predict, oh, take this little bit or take. No, it is based upon you. And that is why you would figure it out as your activity increase, as your activity decrease, as you become conscious about your body. Meaning go into the desert often. But the thing is, they measured it by the OMA. You see, they measured the amount of glucose they were consuming by the OMA, the source of glucose. The one who gathered much did not have too much. Very interesting. And the one who gathered little did not have too little. Very interesting. Everyone had gathered just as much as they need. Everybody's body is different. The amount of glucose is you to know what is right for you. But there was an instruction. Here is the instruction. No one is to keep any of it until morning. This here has to be understood in terms of what we call chronological time. They were getting this in the morning. The birds were coming in the evening to give them the source of meat or flesh, to give this amino acid and fatty acids. And you were not supposed to keep it until morning. This is a very, very important statement. You were supposed to eat your meat in the evening so that by the morning time your meat is fully digested and there should be little waste. You are supposed to eat your glucose in the morning, and you should not store your glucose and hold it there to go and eat it the next morning. Again, the same glucose the next morning. You should get fresh glucose, fresh source of glucose. Why? Because glucose is gonna ferment, and the fermentation of glucose is what is important. Glucose sugars, simple sugars, ferment very easy when it is kept in a container and there was heat. So we should make sure that we get our glucose moving through our bodies quickly. So don't go and eat your glucose in the evening. Keep it away. Moses didn't have to get angry, but he would, because you are putting in maggots in your stomach when you put glucose in your stomach at the wrong time. Imagine eating a meal full of meat and then loading it up with glucose, sources of glucose, especially the refined type, and hoping that this would go through quickly enough in the night, and it does move or it doesn't move, whatever, but you would be getting molecules of glucose in your gastric acid stomach, which could be feeding H. pylori, helping them to use these glucose molecules to build up themselves as individuals and build up their homes as LPS structures and biofilm. So let's be careful about that. We are to consume each morning, if we are consuming, and not everybody needs to consume glucose or sources of glucose, we are to consume early in the morning before the sun comes up. Let's get it in. It will digest quickly, and when it digests quickly, it will give you glucose in your bloodstream. But by the evening time, 12, 1, 2, you should have your quail, your flesh loaded up so that you could digest and provide the amino acids you need for the night. Now, what happens when it comes to that 6th day, the day before the day of rest? That day, you are to take twice as much that you consume. So you're taking 2 omas of glucose. Now, notice it's just saying on the 6th day they gather twice as much, and then they have a dash 2 omas. But is it only of the manna? And the leader of the community came and reported to Moses. He said, "This is what the Lord says. Tomorrow is the day of the Sabbath." Now, this is what is important, the day of rest. We'll get into that. It's a holy day for the body. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Why the word boil is used? Because it's the meat we're speaking about here for the cooking, and bake is used for the manna. So prepare the both of them. Save what is left and keep it until the morning. You have to double up on your portions, because this here is a double rest for the body, because you would have slept the night where the body, when the body goes into a state of rest, it starts needing more amino acids and fatty acids. And that is why we need to understand, on those days we call Sabbaths, and on those days we call the days of rest, we are not supposed to just be chilling out and saying, well, we could eat anything or drink anything. No, we are to be more conscientious about our input of amino acids and fatty acids, because the body on a day of rest is just like you're sleeping in the night. In the night of rest, your body is going into more repair mode, and that is why you need to understand this theory here, the trios theory. Your body is going into states of repair or regeneration after stimulation ceases. Rest here means we would have down-regulate our stimulation from the week, whether it's going to work or school or whatever we're doing. We have down-regulated stimulation. We call it a day of rest. Therefore, we have to upregulate the amount of amino acids and fatty acids needed on those times. You might say, this is crazy. You're asking us to eat more? No, we're asking you to supply more on the time you are resting. And that is why we were given these instructions that in the evening, we supply amino acids, because you are going to sleep in the night and you need to supply amino acids and fatty acids and vitamins when you are resting. So if you're doubling up on the rest, then supply more, because the liver and the entire spiritual system would start repairing and doing more. The more you rest, is the more amino acids and fatty acids should be in the body to do that complete restoration. So bake what you have to bake, boil what you have to boil, and save what is left and keep it until morning. This is our cycle that we have to repeat every week. Again, folks, this is just my interpretation for my body, myself. However, I would make these notes and I'm posting them on the YouTube for myself to reflect on, to listen. We have three consequential issues here. The fruits, which is sources of glucose and fructose, has to be understood in context that the fructose molecules from the fruits would not hit your liver in a great quantity because of its fiber content. And this fruit should be consumed with clear passage, targeting the last part of your system called the colon. That is what we should be thinking. When we are having fruits, you should be saying fruits for the colon, not fruits to supply anything to the blood. Say fruits for the colon, so you start becoming consciously aware. You're eating fruits on what we call an empty stomach, away from most other meals, especially from a heavy, well, you'll see how that play a heavy meat meal. You take fruits very much the furthest away from it. So that's why it is advised when you get up early, you have your fruits so that the fiber gets down to the colon. They use the fiber and make something called a lot of other things, but we well understand that one of the things that they make is they use the fiber to make butyrate, which is very important for colonic health. They make very much other substrates, but they also take the fructose and the phosphorylate it. They make it into something different so that if it gets absorbed, it doesn't become a burden on the liver. Now, when you consume fructose in the juice formats without the fiber, when you squeeze your orange juice and you squeeze your fruits and you take fructose, it goes to the liver, and the liver has to bear the burden of, only the liver bears the burden of dealing with fructose. When you drink high fructose corn syrup, you are doing that more or less worse than if you drink orange juice. So if you put them in a grid on a scale, you could titrate. You could say a fruit is good. It would go to the colon on an empty stomach. A fruit eaten in a full stomach, let's say you have something like meat or flesh, would actually takes longer to digest. It would be in the back and more fructose could be absorbed, so you might want to be careful there. A fruit that is juiced is gonna hit the liver with a lot of fructose, glucose molecules and fructose molecules, because it's liquid, it's easy to absorb in the small intestine. A fruit that is placed in a fancy way, or not a fruit, fructose, that is called high fructose corn syrup, means multiple millions of molecules in a very easy to absorb format placed in many of our refined foods, hitting the liver. And so you see dangers now with fructose. But you also have glucose. You generally have glucose as your source of energy, and you need that if you are taking it through your mouth. If you are very healthy, and you're taking glucose in your mouth, you are taking glucose based on what is your measure of need. If you are sedated, you have to be careful because you are not moving your muscles. It means the glucose would just be there, and insulin will have to come and help the glucose get itself into the organ cells, liver being specifically targeted fat cells. However, if you are active, your legs are moving, and you have glucose in your body, the muscles do not need glucose. They will just be metabolizing glucose, using glucose, and doing a wonderful job with glucose, and they will be fine. But you have to be conscious about the timing, because you are not generally active if you are going to bed, whatever your time of sleep is. And then when it comes to you saying you're taking a day of rest, which we call a Sabbath for the day of rest, then you have to be even more conscious about the amount of acids, fatty acids, amino acids, vitamins and minerals in your body. You may say the day of rest you don't need nothing in your body, but it might just be the day of rest that you need more in your body, because the body is going into a state now of twice time the deeper cleansing, deeper restoration, so it needs more minerals, more fatty acids, and more amino acids to pull itself together. Again, folks, thank you for the summary. This is my theory. I do have a link for you to review this video on my website, and if you're interested in this protocol, it's called the 3 protocol, three things that works together. I have it for sale. Thank you so much.